the Germans. After its surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan had entered the war on Germany's side. Sweeping down the Malay Peninsula, the Japanese had caught the British forces in Southeast Asia napping. The British garrison in Singapore was forced to surrender. Winston Churchill called it the biggest defeat in British history. Among the 130,000 Allied prisoners were tens of thousands of Indians. Back in Berlin, Bose visited the Japanese embassy to offer his services. He'd set up an Indian Legion in Germany and wanted to do the same in Southeast Asia, together with the Japanese. It was agreed that he would make his way to Japan as soon as possible. But first, Bose travelled to the German military headquarters in East Prussia to meet the man he'd been chasing for years. Bose's prestige in Germany was at a high. He wanted to convince the Führer to give his public support for Indian independence. Their handshake was captured on camera, but the meeting didn't go as well as Bose had planned.
He was disappointed because Hitler was not prepared to issue a declaration in support of Indian independence. Hitler wouldn't do it, Ribbentrop wouldn't do it either. No one would.
Despite the disappointment, the mere fact of Bose's meeting with Hitler was an extraordinary propaganda coup for the Netaji. It was seized upon by friends and foes alike. In India, it's long become part of the Netaji folklore. At the opening of a new school in Chennai, the event is staged in honor of the Netaji's daughter, even if it feels a bit uncomfortable.
If you look at the motivation of his work, which was to fight against the colonial power Great Britain, which suppressed his home country, he was looking for support from others. And where would he find it? Certainly not in the United States or France or many of the other European countries who were colonial powers themselves. So he was looking for support with the enemy of his enemy, so to say.
Jai Hind war der Gruß, der in Berlin erfunden wurde.
Jai Hind was the greeting that was coined in Berlin.
Und wo sich
everyone wanted to use the phrase, "Long live India."
begrüßen wollten, und
And that's what they did.
durchgeführt worden.
Perhaps it's no longer in use today. Although if you greet one of the old boys with Jai Hind, they still understand.
Dann verstehen die das immer noch.
Jai Hind! Jai Hind!
Back in Berlin, the Netaji was getting impatient. It would be months before a U-boat was available for his trip to Japan. Bose used the time to hold an international conference on India. It introduced a piece of music that would later become India's national anthem.
Den Kampf bis zum Siege weiterzuführen, zu bekräftigen. In diesem Kampf, der für Indien ein Kampf Sein oder Nichtsein ist, kann es nur einen Ausgang geben, unseren gemeinsamen Ziel. Lang leben die Dreifachmächte und ihre Verbündeten. Lang lebe das freie Indien.
Da hat große Pläne entwickelt. Das ging ja über
He had great plans, beyond new stamps and coins for India. He had ideas on the postal system. He had ideas on how to organize the police. In the opinion of German observers, he was so advanced in his thinking that if India had become independent, he could have implemented his ideas for a new government immediately.
Staatsführung und der Regierung hätte umsetzen können.
Bose considered the German police to be the perfect model for an independent India. He even managed to get an appointment with the Nazis' leading police expert. it was Heinrich Himmler, Reichsführer of the SS, architect of the final solution. Amazingly, the Nazis' most murderous racist made Bose feel extremely welcome.
Heinrich Himmler hatte sich jahrelang mit Indien beschäftigt.
Heinrich Himmler had been preoccupied with India for years. He knew about Indian culture, about Indian literature like Shakuntala, etc., and he was interested in learning more about India under British rule, politically and economically.
Unter britischer Herrschaft jetzt stand, zu erfahren.
In 1938, Himmler had even sent an expedition of SS scientists to Tibet, believing it to be the original heartland of the Germanic tribes. A film about the expedition was shown in German cinemas and had been hugely popular. During their meeting, Himmler promised Bose that he would protect the Indian Legion. They parted on good terms. The following day, Bose returned to Berlin. Himmler's next appointment was in Auschwitz. For Amelia, these were anxious times. She was several months pregnant.
She certainly was not very happy, I'm sure. But I think she always accepted that his love for India came first, and any personal kind of responsibility or affection would have to be in second or third place. I doubt that she argued with him to do anything different, because it certainly would not have had any effect.
In November, Emilia gave birth to a baby girl, Anita. 3 months later, Bose's time of waiting came to an end. He boarded the German submarine U-180 and quietly slipped away, leaving behind his wife and daughter. To avoid being detected by British destroyers in the English Channel, Bose's U-boat was heading for the icy waters north of Scotland. Willy Carnot was one of the German submarine's torpedo engineers.
It was our great fortune that there was a storm with wind force 12. No patrol boats could last in the area, and aeroplanes couldn't take off either. At the same time, the thermometer dropped to about -10 degrees Celsius. It was so cold that our deck gun turned into a gigantic block of ice. Mr. Bose and Mr. Hassan fared extremely poorly in the rough sea. They spent most of the time in their berths. They were green and yellow. They almost changed color.
Verschwand ja ganz heimlich. Und es durfte
He
niemand
disappeared secretly, and no one was allowed to say where he had actually gone or where he was.
Das war der Grund.
That was why our soldiers felt abandoned.
Im Stich gelassen.
Bose was no longer there.
Bose war nicht mehr da. Es war eigentlich
It was actually a happy time. We had a special status,
Sonderstellung.
and that saved our
Uns
lives.
das Leben bewahrt.
Meanwhile, Bose's U-boat headed for the Indian Ocean. He was to be transferred to a Japanese submarine that would take the Netaji all the way to Japan.
Bose hat sich schrecklich gefürchtet.
Bose was terrified. He absolutely refused to get into the Japanese dinghy because when he saw it, he realized he would be in water up to his backside. Even after trying to persuade him, he wouldn't go. So we had to prepare our dinghy, which had a solid bottom. And in the end, it was us pushing him rather than him going. All around us there were triangular fins, a sign that there were sharks nearby.
The Japanese submarine managed to carry Bose all the way to Southeast Asia. From there, he boarded a flight to Tokyo.
We are now living in a period.
Addressing the Japanese government, Bose was elated.
Within the ranks of the Indian National Congress, you see today.
He always felt more comfortable with the Japanese than he had ever felt with the Germans. I think he made a much greater impact. He made no impact on Hitler. He was a flea. He was an Indian flea to Hitler. To Tojo, he was a real person, the head of a, or at least the potential head of a freedom movement who could ally with the Japanese and perhaps raise a big rebellion which would help the Japanese to defeat the British in Southeast Asia.
Bose now proceeded to Singapore. He received a hero's welcome by thousands of Indian volunteers.